They been busy? I know we're going live, but I just forgot to ask that question.
That's okay, a little bit, which was good. Hence the jacket, but I might take it off halfway through.
Well, it would make me feel more comfortable. No, just kidding. Whatever you need to do. The good thing around the decision table, my friend, is that literally we are just having a conversation. And I'm looking forward to today's conversation because I know when we got to hang out, when was it? A couple of weeks ago? A week ago? Yes. How long ago was it? Whenever it was.
Yes, whenever.
We got into some pretty cool conversations. So I know that we are going to deep dive into some layers today, I think.
Yes, definitely. So I'm really looking forward to it as well.
Yeah. So when you hear the lens of humanity as stakeholders, let's go deep from that. What does that bring up in you?
I think for me, the first question would be, how humane are we living, or do we want to live? Because the word stands there and it's been parked and used, I feel, more in essays or at university. But in our everyday life, how much of it do we bring? So do we want to be real and look at it again? And, humanity, humans act collective. People said it's about the quality that makes us human. So then my second question is, are we aware that we're human, and which quality do we intentionally bring into our everyday life?
Let's do that first one. Can you repeat the question?
So first, how we human in our everyday living, so to speak. So, and the second one was, the quality we bring into our life. So, because I do believe that first there's, if we start thinking, we're probably not as human as we believe we are. Because every day, I believe a lot of people are on autopilot.
So more robotic.
More robotic. So that will be the first part of the equation. Do you realize that how much of you is humane in your everyday when you show up? Because if we are to solve some big problems, and if we want everyone to look at the world through the lens of, humanity, then at the very beginning, the people having the thoughts and the decision makers, how much of them are actually walking the walk?
Okay, let's just break this down, because you have gone so to that side of it, which I love, by the way, and I wanna sort of deep dive into that. But if we think of humans, so just so that we are communicating the same, when you think of humans, it's not just about being a human, or is it about identifying as a human? And then what is being humane?
Very good one. I think there's a transition in life where when people do the work, and in the line of what I do, which is really being there for leaders and early stage entrepreneurs that have massive goals, being there to, it's a bit like a stabilizer. People refer me as the Formula One pit stop. You come in as a leader and you take all the faulty part, we remove all the excess part, we refuel the engine with what I call a unique human superpower or leadership superpower. And I think at the beginning, it's that switch, that thinking about, how much of me is just, doing for the professional side. So how well do I do my job? How well do I show up? And the conversation I invite everyone to have, and all my mentees and leaders in an organization when I step in, is, what about the spiritual side? So it's 2021. It's not about anything religious, but it's how well you show up. And I think the first question for leaders in terms of being a human or being humane is about how much of reconciliation or balance do I have in my life between my professional side, go, get the promotion, tick all those boxes, really good at doing my job and ramming the team, versus how well do I show up as a human? How much do I
and that's one of the conversations I'm having a lot on the decision table, using this as a lens. And so from that thinking that you have beautifully said there, by the way, how do we then narrow that gap from being one person who's the professional, show up the way we do that way, to being the personal person? And this is huge for me. And in fact, one of the things that I'm working on as a collaborative partnership right now is coming up with an assessment tool that brings together both the personal and professional side together. In other words, and it's not just the personal professional, it's the physical, it's the spiritual, it's the emotional side. And because I feel that if you think about the leaders that you get to work with, there is no indicators showing or key performing, KPIs, key performing indicators for things like our energy level, or for things like, have we been moving enough to keep our brains working, or our attitude temperature at a certain level, or whatever it is, right? Like, there's just not those things, yet we put so much on, and we can easily describe how much, this is going to hit our bottom dollar.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I'm literally working on really a lot at the moment is how can we now assess this within our organizations so that we are turning up as a whole, in other words, as a whole human at the table, not just this sort of parts of us. Any thoughts around that?
Plenty. I love what you said.
Excellent.
I love what you said at the beginning, because for me, there's two sides. There's always the leaders and the entrepreneurs, and then the organization as a whole. If I look at the leaders, and that's exactly one of the programs I have, the Plateau Immersive. And when we're doing that, is first to take stock about where we're at. And it's a bit like the work of the archaeologist. We go back to understand where we come from and what has made us who we are today. Yeah. We've lived the past 20, 30, 40 years with the expectation of modeling the role leader in power. And depending which part of the world you grew up, depending your environment, your social economic background, they're very different. And,
I've noticed that, by the way. You're quite different to me. And you sound a little different to me too.
As well, apparently.
Yes.
It's part of being human. We're all very different.
Oh, yes.
And that is amazing, because see, you say you sound different, you look different, yet when it comes to leadership, it's as if everyone was coming out of the same mold. It is about performance, it is about driving the project. So we looked up to a false ideal that we believe we had to, emulate in order to fit the criteria to get into the big team, to get the promotion, to get, to be poached by another company and to succeed. And I think we've seen in the past couple of years on that human level for individual and leaders, people want more. And because the people expect more from their life, from their partners, from their family, from their work, from their bosses, they are no longer quiet. They are no longer fitting the script of you going to be fed by your boss. It's more about I'm okay to do the work and I'm going to be paid for that as an exchange. However, I also have some expectation in regards to how I want to be managed, how I want to be led by my own boss. And I think there's an accelerator happening worldwide. And look, we've seen with COVID, we've seen with, all the events in America last year, all the events around the world, in Europe, in Paris with the Yellow Vest 2 years ago, in Europe, you've seen it in Hong Kong last year with the Umbrella Revolution. People are no longer going to be quiet, and they are no longer going to accept what is. There is a collective awareness that, we deserve and we can have better, and times are changing. So that is, I think, the external factor. And for a
Okay,
leader,
so can I just ask a question from that? Does this mean that this is a good thing or a bad thing? Or what do you see from that? See, because the first thing that I think of when you bring this up is I wonder if it builds lack of trust within leadership, both with the leader knowing that the pathway ahead is kind of uncertain, but then also those that are within that leadership going, well, I'm not sure if I trust where the leader's going now because they're pretty old school in the way they're thinking right now.
correct. So two ways to look at it. If you're within an organization, you should have done what I call the work around what do we stand for? What do we believe in? Where does that own genius is coming from, whether it be for a service or a product? And as an example, Microsoft, Satya Nadella got promoted to CEO a few years ago. And Microsoft had not a purpose, not a mission, but what I call a BHAG, a big, audacious, hairy goals, which was to have a computer on every desk in a home into the developed countries. And you can argue from a commercial perspective that that was reached by the mid-90s, meaning from mid-90s to early 2000, where Satya got promoted. Basically, the exec just looked around and kept doing the same thing because the goal was already reached. And when he came in, he started looking at purpose and he did some work around it. And he said, okay, we have to reconnect. And the way we can do that is what was the very first iteration on our product we did at the very beginning of the company. And if we look at the type of iteration we made to the product, they would have been in service to our audience.
Yeah.
And by looking at that, they decided to go back into the entrepreneurial mind. They decided to come up with all those different apps with Microsoft Teams. And then you look at the direct correlation with Microsoft on the stock market. And only because they reconnected with the very own genius, with the very primary essence of the business. And then everyone got aligned. So then you can no longer look at your boss and be like, where are we heading? Because everyone is on the same page and singing from the same hymn sheet. So that's point number one. And that is quite interesting. Number two, I think it's from a personal level. So what's happening in Australia now in the government, there's a lot of news that have hit the media. And I think it's either the leader is a real leader and understand that in time of uncertainty, they have to lead the path and be very strong. Or you have the old guard, which is going to, number one, be silence. Number two, probably defect. And number three, kind of run for cover and have all the behind the closed door conversation before we come up with something that's going to appease everyone. And you see it day in, day out. It doesn't need to be politics. It could be family, it could be business, it could be friends. And I think those are the two lenses through which you can look at it. But to go back to your first question, is it healthy for people to speak up? I think it is, because changes come from people voicing their opinion, people knowing there's something better. So I do believe, but then it's either you have the right leader, so to speak, in power that is going to effectively navigate and lead, or you have a leader that needs to move on. And then, the forces, it's like, the magnetic forces that's going to, the friction is going to be amplified before it can be appeased. Look in the US again, it got amplified before it could be appeased. I'm not saying right now it's the solution and it's perfect, but it's just for us to have clear example right in front of our eyes.
It's interesting you talk about things like that. Like, there's so many levels we could go down on a lot of what you just said. But one of the things that I'd love to sort of question is, yes, we can have a voice, but I don't know that sometimes that voice is heard. I don't know that the places in which people are having a voice are necessarily the right places. I also question that when you have a voice, that it's actually going to bring a change. We can make a lot of noise.
Yeah.
We can all speak up, and guess what? It can get very noisy in there.
Yeah.
So my question from that would be, is how do we take it from this noise to a conversation that is actually going to then bring change? And I think that this is we can often, and I see this a lot, to be honest, where people can identify quite nicely the problems that we're facing across the globe. And they're right. There are a lot of problems. What I'm interested in is that we don't just identify the problems, but that we actually have some solutions to bring to the table, and that we keep moving towards that. I'm not sure if we continue to just be this voice and make this noise, that anything's actually going to change from that.
Definitely. And some of the voices are complete and utter noise. Full stop. A lot of because I think as human, we have lost a lot of clarity of thinking. And when you have a conversation with friends, they often come to whoever has a bit of clarity. And when you look at them and tell them because I think one of the biggest problems is people are no longer used to see things for what they are. They are used to see things for what they believe is right for them, or it's better through their own eyes.
Okay, let's just pull that apart. They're used to seeing things. They're not used to seeing things as they are. That's what you said, right?
Right.
Okay. And is that why? Why have you come up with that conclusion? Where's that come from?
True story. I had a few bosses before I collected 2 burnout, and I went into do a lot of inner work and spiritual work and all that. Yeah. I was probably one of the biggest rat in the rat race. I was really going for it. A couple of my bosses that poached me over the years, I realized that they had amazing ideas and they were very good at rallying people and poaching people like me to help them furthering their advancement. But they were painting the pictures that were actually going along with the narrative they had in mind. And often you see with entrepreneurs, and one of the biggest examples is in the US, in Silicon Valley, and it's just gone to trial now, you see that you had that founder that was looking at from a drop of blood to have all the tests you could have possibly human being. And she had rallied donors from the White House, so all the way to the top. And she was like many entrepreneurs, they were in their own mind, they were building, and they had the building blocks, but the building blocks were through the lens that was the right one for them, for the end goal they had in mind. Meaning they disregarded along the way key factor, key element, key people, key conversation for the benefit of their own view, because it was serving the narrative. And at the end, you end up with a company that's going bust. You're going to investors losing millions and billions of dollars on the stock market. You end up with someone that's nearly in jail and people that are burned right, left, and center. So not ideal. But I do believe it's because that pursuit of excellence, that are you going to be the next big shot, people slowly stop seeing things for what they are, and they lose clarity very, very rapidly, because we all bought it into the big dream of what you could become or be. So I think that's one key element there. And then also because we are less and less used to have real, honest, raw conversation.
Why do you think? So just if you think of that raw, honest, real conversation, if you think of that, why as a human do we struggle to have that conversation?
I think truth is extremely uncomfortable. When you're being raw and real, mostly everything that's going to come out is around the truth. And it should be coming out in a non-judgmental way, meaning the tip of the spear is really sharp and it's going straight to the heart. I had a conversation last night with a client of mine, right on the director level, being looking at that top room for a number of years, all male in the room, reached out to me at a point which was a tipping point where there was about, okay, things would have to give and possibly leave the organization after a number of years. We started working on that leadership, on bringing the professional and the spiritual side. The last conversation had 3 days ago with DMD was, I've seen the bounds and leaps of what you've been doing on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, the way you show up, the energy you bring, the conversations you're having. And it's no longer about you having to prep to fit the bigger room. It's about us being ready for what you're going to bring.
Yeah. Interesting.
And that is really telling and really powerful, because when you talk about change and how do you change, I think the minute you are true to yourself, or truer, the minute you see things for what they are without judgment, and you share them with the hope to benefit to people and to the betterment of an organization, an individual, a project, a team, without attachment, then it's good.
See, and that goes back to my whole thinking around what if we brought back to the table humanity as stakeholders? And, you know, I think if we did that, there would have to be a vulnerability at the table. There would have to be a no judgment zone. There would have to be this fact that we can't do it robotic anymore. And it would have to be that we add, you know, many differences to the table, because we need that when we come back to humanity. And the thing that puts it as an even playing field to me is that when we look through the lens of humanity as being the first thing that we look through, it actually evens it out at the table, because every single one of us, you, me, are a human, and all we're looking through first as a first sort of filter is it adding value to humanity? Is it taking away?
Yeah.
And it seems so simple, but we're not doing that.
Oh, definitely. And I love that thinking, because even in training, or, you know, when you go to workshops, people say, or in mentoring session, okay, you know better than anyone else. And then you might find yourself in the street and looking at someone acting or someone doing something, and we might judge, which is, you know, to do with, you know, who's first or second, knowing there's none. But the minute you said, you know, act as human,
yes,
as you say, it brings it down to we all here.
Yeah.
And the second point you said at the beginning, saying that, you know, the KPIs in organization. When I work in organization, I always said, if I come, we're going to have to look at the values, and we're going to have to look at some of the KPIs, and we're redefining them together, either with the team or with the exec, because whatever you put your focus and attention to, expand.
Correct. But which is great. And we understand that concept. But here's the thing. How do you see that is adding? Because, you know, here's an example. I get asked the question all the time. Hey, Kiri Maree, I want to see us expand and increase our economic growth. Then we're going to get around to bringing the cultural impact and everything else that we want to, or the social impact or environmental impact that we want to as a company organization. And I go, excuse me, did you know that every decision you make at the table is making an impact? And it's not one or the other. But the thing that we don't have within the culture that we've created within leadership, within our organizations, is we put focus and priority on things that is easy for us to measure as a society.
Again,
and I wonder, correct. And I'm just agreeing with your last comment. Whatever we put focus on, it will actually bring the result that we want. What I found, and what has been so interesting in the work that I do, is that actually the more you give, the more you focus on an out focus than an in focus, the increase is just, the difference is phenomenal.
And so I've got a question for you now, Kiri. It's interesting. I was having a conversation with an exec the other day, and it was very clear very rapidly that individual was externally focused. The entire life, the leadership, the management style was all externally focused. There was nothing internal. So obviously professional, spiritual. And the struggle was real. Like we had to have a break, and he could not understand and see and touch what would the internal look like, feel like, be like, what it meant. And I think for different leaders, some of the work start at the very, very base because they are so disconnected and entrenched into the professional side, which is all about the performance and the output, as you were saying, that they have no, in the tool, as I always say to people, you've got your toolkit, the part of the toolkit is empty. There is nothing there for you to use. So what do you do?
In there. Here's the thing. I think it's in there. We're just not accessing it or using it, right? And we're not putting value to that tool that's in there. I think what would be interesting and something that I am furthering in what I'm looking at right now, and that is looking at mental health. And then you look at, say, movement, and I've got someone in my world that's focusing in a lot around movement right now, and how that's actually, and there's a lot of research to back this up, but how that helps to increase the mental capacity that you have, which of course is going to make us so much more intelligent. And then guess what? Productivity wise, that goes up as well on the thing. Now, the thing is correlations between these things. So if we take time out to maybe every 2 hours, we take a 5-minute break to meditate. If we bring the spiritual side into it, right? Like where we take that moment that is removing from the busyness of it all to go, maybe it's just to breathe. Maybe it's to look outside and just take in the view for the minute. How would this make a difference for the next 2 hours? Those things are so important. We know the benefits of them. And in some studies, and this is something I'm having with lots of scientists, by the way, at the moment, is I get it that we need to collect data. I get it that we need data. And by the time you've gathered all this data, the world would have moved on. And the benefit of what you've just gathered data for would be out the door and outdated. So how do we keep up with a forever changing world that maybe we don't have exact data, but there is some data that we can pull on that we're not pulling on? And I think I have a strong feeling around this that one of the places we could do this is have more conversations, bring the information and create the awareness to a more of a collective so that we can go, well, guess what? It might not be something that I've thought about or even considered. But when I hear that story, when I hear that perspective, I go, let's question that. What if we were to test and measure that a little bit in what we're doing and be willing to evolve in where we're at and to listen to others and to go, no, I don't think that'll work with us, but maybe this would. Let's give a test and measure here and maybe we'll get a result that's different.
100%. And with what there's so much that you said there, but it all starts with awareness. And I think we can if we can get the leaders of tomorrow, anyone, every single human on earth, to start to develop their awareness. The minute you bring something forward across the decision table, people will be open, see the benefit, and go on. Right now, because of the lack of awareness, the minute we step into a boardroom, everything has to be evidence-based, and yet sometimes not followed. We've seen that plenty of time in the last few years. Do you know what I mean? But I think if we can start with that major piece of awareness of people to develop a little bit more the intuition, to follow their gut feeling, to not only rely solely and purely on the data for the sole purpose of what you're saying, because by the time it gets proven and reproven and digested and we have something to do with it, it's 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the track, and we know there's something better for where, the human consciousness.
So here's the next piece. Do you want to know the next piece to this? And
Yes.
I like seriously think this is that, and it's why one of the pieces of work that I really speak about is knowing how to exercise the muscle of human intelligence. Because here's the thing, if we've got the data that we have through everything else that we can have, and we've got so much more access nowadays than ever before to amazing data across the globe, there's another piece of data that we actually have amazing access if we have these conversations and if we trust ourselves and are not robots, but actually really know how to pull the data within us. That's what our human intelligence is, the data that we gather, not from our environment, from our choices, from maybe our DNA, from all the things, the spiritual side, the emotional side, the physical, all that data that's within us as a human. What if we were able to collect that, understand it better, and make smart decisions, knowing and trusting the data we have within us, plus the data on the outside, and then we were able to test and measure it and own. And I think this is the next piece of it, the ownership of what that data represents, what we know from that, what are we going to own from that? And then what are we going to be courageous enough, brave enough to stand up and to get out there and be part of that change that's needed?
I think it's, you beautifully said it there, but this is the work on earth, because if we take the lens that we are not human being having a spiritual experience, we are spiritual being having a human experience. And what does that mean to do as a human having, that experience on earth, for example? And I know we're going really high right now, but it's exactly this. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
This is direct correlation with what you just shared, because it's about going back to what matters, to the essence and what we have in there, because all the answers are there. And I think most of the work is, as I shared in some of the work, is I love the, the Michelangelo, which is, used famously where the David, it was there in the middle and you had to chip away the marble. But when I look at leaders, I say, so how much shit do we going to have to chip away to see your marble in the middle? And they all look at me like, what do you mean? And I say, well, by looking at everyone around and by wanting to fit in for the past 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years, how much layers are put on top of you? So your voice diminished, your feeling, your awareness has diminished to just conform to what you believed was the norm and what you had to do in order to succeed. And right now, it's biting you back big time, because everyone is pointing, saying, those are not the leaders we no longer want. We want a different type of leaders. And then they had to reverse engineer it to go back to what you were saying, the awareness, the data, the courage to make the right decisions and to move forward with it.
Yeah, well, to own your piece to that. But here's the thing. So you really clearly said how leaders know that that's not what they want. I'm not convinced leaders know what they want.
No, the people, the masses, the
human... No, I understand that. But what I'm saying is I'm not convinced. And I wonder how many... like I used to, here's an example, personal example of it, where I would go, like, I don't like where leadership is. I actually don't even want to be a leader because I don't want to be associated with leadership. And that's not because there's not some amazing leaders. There was. In general, I just didn't like... I felt like a lot of leadership was old school, where it told you what to do. I felt like there was a lot of dictatorship leadership. I felt like where leadership was actually taking away voice from humanity rather than giving it. I felt like it was broken systems. I felt like there were processes that we were a part of and continue to be a part of that are really outdated, yet no one questions it. And that's a major concern of mine. And so I thought, I don't really want to be associated with leadership because that doesn't sound like the way I want to be going forward. So, but I realized that maybe that's the reason I needed to be a part of leadership.
Mm.
And that if not me, then who was going to be that leader that I wanted to role model from, figure out what they are doing, and then go do it myself. And I think that this is one of the problems, is that it's easy to say and identify where we don't like it to being right now, or even go, we need to have more conversation around this. What I'm finding interesting is not only is it kind of hard to get people to have conversations like this in an open forum, by the way, it's not the easiest thing. And yet it's so important for us to be having these conversations, because and one of those reasons you've already identified, safe platform. For lots, it's hard because we just have them quietly behind. We'll just have a conversation. What if you disagree with me? That's actually okay. It's fine. I'm going to agree to disagree. That's fine. But I'm also going to agree to go, maybe I'm listening to what you're saying now, and maybe I'm going to shift what I'm going to say, because now you've given a different perspective. And I think that this is what's interesting. It's easy to go, okay, we know what the problem is. Okay, we're going to have these conversations. It's going to be uncomfortable. No human being goes, pick me, let's have a conversation, let's get uncomfortable. Like it's not our human sort of nature, right? In general.
And it's not for everyone to be equipped to have them either. A lot of people aren't equipped for having those raw, real, thought-provoking conversations. But I think it's similar to when we're young. Give an ice cream to a kid, and then 3 seconds later take it back. Now, if there is trust, and
that's nasty.
Well, but the thing is, if the kid is evolving in an environment which is trustworthy, full of unconditional love, and that's extremely important, unconditional love, because many things they give it, but they don't. The kid is more likely going to look at you, try to work out what you're doing, then wait and know it's going to get it back. Any other kid which you give, because for whatever reason, you take it out and you're going to have a drama within 3 to 4 seconds. Similar with leaders. If you give them a paycheck, you give them a title, some of them, I realize with leaders, a lot of them, they are expressing themselves fully through their work title. So their whole worth resides in their title and their job. Take that away, they are lost. Hence why anything that's uncomfortable, whether it's conversation, ideas, exploration, the door is shut, because they're wanting to preserve what they have, So it's no longer an ice cream, it's much bigger than an ice cream, but they're really guarding, because as human, I think we are, the way we are wired from a scientific level in our brain is to protect us. Fear is to protect us from the unknown, so to keep us in a safe space. And because the way we've been built, and that role modeling of leadership look like this, and that's what you got to do along the way to end up with the big job and the success of and what we know, then fear is going to kick in and be like, hey, thought-provoking conversation, but not to have, you got to guard your. So there's a lot.
So how do we have more of these conversations where I think two. I don't know why I said two. One, I think we need to have, and maybe it's not with everyone, but I don't know about this. I think all of us have to learn to have an uncomfortable conversation. It might be an uncomfortable conversation with your child. It might be the uncomfortable conversation with your partner. It might be the uncomfortable conversation at the shop because something went wrong there. We have got to learn as a society to be able to have uncomfortable conversations. That's one thing. How do we do that better, more effectively? How do we even start wanting to do those? And then the second, I think, is not only are we meant to have uncomfortable conversations, but it's the whole evolving side of this, where we are having a conversation. We have no idea where we're going with this conversation from the start. But we're willing to have a conversation to know that at the end of this conversation, you and I are both going to be smarter human beings because of it, right? And we're going to take whatever that is and then go, we just got a learning from this and take it into whatever we do. We are willing to evolve as this conversation keeps continuing. Now, that's not an easy thing to show up and go, well, I might not know exactly what she's talking about. I might not understand even where she's going with this. I might not even understand where I'm going with this. That's uncomfortable in itself.
Extremely. And look, a couple of views. One of it I love to remember is from Maya Angelou. We don't know what we don't know, but when you know better, you do better. And I think it is so important if we could first hold everyone up to the fact that when you know better, you do better, because otherwise
when you know better,
you do better.
And my thinking from that, I never knew that was part of it, to be honest. I really like that. So when you know better, you'll do better. And my thing is, you don't know what you don't know, but when you know something, there's a responsibility.
Correct, 100%. But it's very interesting how you were talking about the point of not wanting to be in leadership. And while I was doing the introspection and, building some course and all that, I was listening to an interview with Maya Angelou, and I had heard that before, but it hit me like a ton of bricks. You can't shy away because and you have, as you said, a responsibility to add your little bit to it, because, what is of value. So bring it to the table. But interestingly, I think at the very beginning in schools, and that's going to be very hard, but if we can, bring into the conversation, into schools, the piece about awareness. If you can bring the piece about we're just all human, full stop, and we live our life differently, and there's different expression of ourselves, and, there is no, hierarchy there. We are all as important one to another. Because I believe that's where it starts, because we know that it's either school or home, or if they go to a church or a sport club. But those are the exposure. Those are what a kid is exposed to. And that's the beginning of the slapping on,
The layers.
So, the layers. And the first break. So it's like when you do a mask with clay.
Yes.
It's really rigid. The time goes by, it gets really stiff, and then you start falling, and it cracks. Well, teenager years, when most adolescents come from their parents, is because the internal compass is telling them A, and they're being pushed into B. They don't know how to express it. But all that tension between the parents and the kids, especially at the teenagers' years, is mostly felt because between the age of, all the way up to 7, but 7 and up, it's the formative years. And it's been proven, that from 0 to 7, I think it's, I can't remember the philosopher that says, give me a kid until 7 and I'll give you back a man. Because those are the years where we are like sponges. We are absorbing our environment, our surrounding. So to your point, I think awareness is key. If we can somehow infuse that into schools for awareness. And then I think the polar opposite, at the top of the organization, whether it's within the political system, governments, but more so board members and board. Because one have the greater influence on the companies and all the layers. And I think if at a board level, we can tap into those people sitting in those rooms, and if they can set the direction in terms of what would be expected from now on. Yes, there is a commercial side and a professional side, but yes, we're real leaders. We do want people giving their full self to work. We do want awareness because, as you said, it's been measured over time. The companies that are aligned, that have a clear purpose, which is not commercial and PR-like, they do better. They have less churn rates. They are less turnover. People stay longer. They're happier. They're healthier. The well-being is higher than the others.
Yeah. And all those things are always going to be beneficial for someone who is in an organization and at the top of the table there. But here, that's where it's so interesting, because reality is, whether you're at the top table or at the front line of humanity, you're still a human. You still turn up every day as a human. And with being a human, you have needs, you have wants, you have, so many things. And again, it can't be separated. And I go back to that, but I don't understand how, as a society, we have got so far away from seeing a CEO or a director as a human being. And, it's funny because I've been in situations where companies are really harsh to that person in that role. And I go, have you forgotten that that's a human being that you're having this conversation with? And where in your psyche, where in your DNA has it ever been okay for you to forget that? And I do question that every time at the table when things, and it can come from all areas, by the way. I've just seen it a lot at top decision tables where in another case, we're not even innovating what is needed at the front line of humanity because we're not even having the conversations with the front line of humanity to see if this is truly a solution to the problem that they're really absolutely having to face every day of life.
I mean, full lack of awareness is you can be sitting in the top room. And we know even at the very bottom of an organization, and you've worked with amazing organizations and amazing change makers around the world. And what's interesting is even at the very bottom, when you have the conversation around innovation, I'm always asking a pre-question about the top room, and they're not innovating. So how can you expect the bottom of to be innovating if at the top they're not, and they're rigid in their thinking? I mean, it's an example where we always look up to see what's done, what's expected, what's okay. So
what if we looked around? What if we looked around at the table? Here's the thing. This is why I think this is an interesting thing, and I love it, actually, to be honest, because you brought it back to the young kid again, and you brought up an interesting thing from there wasn't that hierarchy thing, right? Yet if we go back to that top table, in a lot of the systems that we're, see and are involved in, there can be this hierarchy. How do we get it from that lack of, let's get rid of that hierarchy? And many would say, but you need someone to lead the way. How do we bring those pieces of information, that data, to the table and start questioning that there might be a different way we could do this?
I like to always share example when I do training in-house to give people tangible example. And one is not too old. Is remember Facebook started to enable you to change your profile picture with a bit of a filter.
Yes.
And so I can't remember the exact time, but it's at least 5 or 6, 7 years ago. They had an intern. An intern came in. And the culture back in the days, which I'm assuming is still, similar now at Facebook, is everyone could propose things. So 3 layers up, there's the big meeting. The intern is in the corner, and the intern has an idea for Gay Pride and Pride Month to enable Facebook users to change the filter to I
remember that. Yeah.
That was the most successful, and the changes with where user adoption went bananas since then, since the inception of Facebook. That was the most successful move of Facebook, and that all came from sitting at a room that felt it was okay to share his things with 3 layers up. So it's really, you say, how you set up the company, what are the channel of communication, because people are scared, again, as we said, you've got the ice cream, you take it away. If we get rid of that hierarchy fully, how does that work? It's going to be difficult. And it doesn't have to be, because some company do it. Now, I'm not saying everything is amazing at Facebook, but it's a very good example of so thinking and acceptance from people. And also, it's one thing for someone to speak up. It's another for the leader to hear it. It's something else for the leader to give the green light to explain what's happening. Because a lot of the people I work with, they generally don't have much trouble speaking, but it's not necessarily a third.
That is such a good point. They generally don't have a problem to be speaking, but they're listening. That's a skill set in itself, isn't it?
I mean, it takes two to tango, but it takes two to
oh my
have
gosh,
a conversation.
It's so true.
And
here's a funny thing. I gotta share this little piece because I happened to be in a room at the beginning of the year, and I got confronted with someone who said, hey, you don't speak up. Like, by the way, I speak up when I feel there's a need and the right platform, and there are people who are ready to hear what I've got to say. And if they're not, you're right, I don't speak up in a great big way because there's so much noise going on. It's not worth it. And there's times and places for it, I believe. And one of the things that I have learned as a great skill as a leader is to actually be very quiet in rooms like that and to listen, observe, and then if people are willing to then start opening up around some things. That's just one of my skill sets that I've learned because I found it so much more beneficial than adding to the noise. And then everyone's just a loud noise. 100%. And I got confronted by this person who said to me, I find that you're not a great leader in this situation because you don't speak up. But let me tell you, every single one of those people in that room was speaking up, and it was so loud. So what? If I spoke up and voiced everything, by the way, I did voice things. They actually next said to me, but I don't even see you. I haven't seen you. And the reality was they were right. They hadn't seen me. I had spoken up. I'd said it right at the beginning. I'd framed it. But because there was so much noise in that room and it was so noisy, everyone else was going blah, 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 blah. But they hadn't seen me right from the start. Yet I said the same thing at the beginning as I did at the end.
And it's quite interesting. And that's part of what I love in the work I do as well. It's about enabling the leaders to be seen and felt for who they are. But interestingly, in that room you were in, probably a lot needed to come out. So it's not also, so when we go in, it's not our job to add to the noise. We're there to enable, to ignite the fire, let them go, and then at the end to take the oxygen out of the room, so to speak, to kill the fire and go bang, 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 for them to have enough.
Especially like the bang, bang, bang beat. Yep.
We're very similar. We're like, where are they? Like, this is where we are.
Yes. And I love how you said that. And it's true. And in that case, and in many other cases that I've learned as well, sometimes the room is just not ready.
That was, oh God, yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Quick story. First big speaking gig.
Yes.
First ever. Big production, big Asia Pacific, room full. Big mistake we do as speakers is I only spoke with the people that booked me and what they wanted. I didn't feel that what they wanted was what the exec wanted, and I didn't ask where the room was at. And snowball effect happened where, from arriving to doing sound check to getting on stage, because, when we do what we do as a job, everything is done is sort of sent in advance. So the company was really happy, say, oh my God, you're the best organized speakers of the whole conference. We're so happy. We've prepared you an amazing entrance. So I arrived like a bloody rock star into that thing.
Yeah.
And the guys there made me even bigger than what?
Yep.
And oh my God, talk about a room that wasn't ready. So you had about 10-15% that loved it, wanted more, they were just amazing. And the rest, they were in shock. They were levitating in shock. And it was the biggest learning curve ever because, as I said, whether it's a
learning curve, that's harsh.
Whether there's a room, an organization, or individual leader I train,
Yeah.
we have the responsibility to assess where the individual is at and to stretch them enough to make them grow and have the confidence to move forward, but not stretch them so they get injured.
Yes.
And I just injured everyone in the room. They snapped one after another.
You didn't mean to, but you did. Yeah.
And my intention was to be here to serve fully.
Yeah.
Probably too much. And
it does hit us in the back head sometimes when we are like that. But yeah.
It took months. So to your point, the room has to be ready. And there's nothing.
And I've learned that. I have learned that. You've learned that through that. That's a harsh way to learn it, though, I have to say. You know, but it's a reality, and we've got to be comfortable to go, this is okay. This is where they are at. And as long as, I always say, as long as I put the seeds out there, it's up to them whether they nurture those, whether they grow those and want to take those. And, you know, there's ways to grow that plant a lot faster. And I know those ways, so come with me. Hey, by the way, when I say that, I go, how can people come if they are the right people with you?
Oh, so my name
I know that was such a switch, but I'm like, if people want to and they are the right people, how do they get to do that with you?
Definitely takes two to tango. Look, there's LinkedIn. There is my website, joriscuesta.com. So the same name on the screen, but .com. And they can find all the information. I'm on Instagram as well if they want to. LinkedIn, there is plenty there. Ask any questions, start a conversation, explore. And as you say, it has to be right for the two people. But there's plenty that can be done. So thank you. Yes.
You're so welcome. And you're an amazing human. So I just wanted to make sure that I hadn't forgotten that. And here's the other piece that I need to remember. And it's this, the question I ask on every decision table, which is, and it's, I know everyone gets nervous at this point, but it's that whole thing of we've created an awareness. And now it's the ownership piece, right? Before a change can happen, we've got to own what we want from this piece. So in today's conversation, we've had an amazing conversation here. We've gone through so many different things. And I think what I love is some of the little side steps that you took when we've talked about awareness, when we've talked about the whole robotic and systems and the thinking, and, you know, you went right up to the spiritual level of, you know, that we are a being, and, you know, you went so many different rabbit holes is what I would call it. And I loved it. But what are you taking from our conversation today?
Guys, I mean, as always, it starts and ends with us. So it starts and ends with you. And as you say, we have a responsibility. So we definitely need to do more of what we're doing. Yeah. Because we have to keep planting, throwing those seeds. We're now at a level where we understand that we're not for everyone, but where people want to come on board, they have to be able to find us. And if that's the way we're going to contribute and bring our awareness and share with no attachment, we should do more and connect with the right people to scale this up, because there's no point being the biggest kept secret.
Yeah. So how are you going to do all those things? You said we, but how are you going to do that?
There's two of us now, Kiri. See, I say we.
Right.
Yeah.
Nice.
There could be something there, but it's also in terms of making sure being intentional in every single decision, knowing that this is part of the work. So whether
that is, by the way, I just got to say that is music to my ears. Like, seriously. Because that's all I think it takes is what if we're intentionally thinking around the decisions we're making and using different lenses, being smart about that and going, okay, with the data that we have, you and I, how are we going to be intentionally making decisions? Because we can only go from what we know. But when we do, there's a responsibility.
And coming to those tables, and that's the good part, is we're walking out with more responsibility. So it suddenly became bigger.
But here's the cool thing, and I think this is what I'm taking from our conversation, and I love the fact that you said we, and you were meaning you and I. And here's the thing that I loved about that. I really loved, it's true, is that, you know, there's a responsibility. You and I have a responsibility. Let's figure out how we can do that together as well as a collective, kind of, you know, as the bigger collective. But that also means that although there's a responsibility, that load is a load that we can share. And I think that was a great reminder for me, is we have to realize that although we have talked about huge things today, we've talked at, you know, like we've talked about global problems in a lot of ways, but we've also gone in the boardroom, and we've gone in the office, in our own personal lives. We've gone, hey, but here's the thing. Although we see it as responsibility, that both you and I have a responsibility, that it's a shared responsibility. And I think that that was a good reminder for me today, was around the fact that it is a shared responsibility, because sometimes I can feel that load, and I'm sure I'm not the only one here that feels that load. And when I want to play a bigger level and my team freak out going, she wants to play even bigger, it's like I don't even think about that. But I know sometimes I sit in that. And honestly, what many probably don't even know is I will shed a tear because the load feels so big when you talk about humanity. And I get that, even for me that talks like this and sits in this arena all the time, even for me it feels huge when I think of humanity. But I also think the great thing is we can bring it back to you and I, and together we share, well, actually, how can we make better decisions? And that is going to add value to humanity, not take away. So that's what I'm taking from our conversation.
I love it. And I can't wait to see. What I always said is, when you're intentional, there is the magic that has happened, or whatever has happened for the past hour. And then how is that going? What is the translation? How is that going to translate into the world? And I'm quite curious and excited to see what's going to pop out of this. Do you know what I mean? What are the seeds that are going to germ and grow? So I'll be really.
So the decision table will have to wait on that, because we have run out of time on this broadcast, but we will continue this journey, I'm sure. And I'm sure I'm going to have you back on here, because this has been amazing. But I want to thank you, and I want to thank you for what you're doing outside of, you know, in this world, and your serving heart that you really truly do, and just in your arena where you are and what you're serving in. And I think even with you, you know, from our conversation here today, but also the other day, was that you haven't even touched the surface of where you are to serve. And I look forward as that continues to unfold. Is there anything you want to finish up on that you haven't had a voice to say today and you really feel like you need to?
Yes, I want to thank you for holding the space and having this decision table, which is, I think, a great stepping stone for what's to come. So thank you for having me and many others brilliant and interesting souls. So keep it up and can't wait.
You're very welcome. I'm going to end this broadcast, but don't you run away quite yet.